No Maury pool. Karen lost her mind and called 911 over my backyard. Let me tell you something about the summer of 2019 that I have never told anyone outside my immediate family. That was the summer I genuinely considered whether a person could be driven to madness by a single neighbor. Not dramatic madness, not movie madness, the quiet kind. The kind that builds up in small increments over months, until one Tuesday afternoon you are standing in your own backyard holding a garden hose, and you realize you have been standing there for 11 minutes without turning it on because your brain has simply stopped cooperating. That was the summer of Beverly Hutchins. My name is Ray Calloway. I have lived in the house on Sycamore Bend since 2011. 8 years before Beverly arrived, I had built something in that backyard that I was genuinely proud of. Not a mansion, not anything that would end up in a magazine, just a really good backyard, stamped concrete patio, string lights. A fire pit I built myself out of reclaimed brick over the course of 3 weekends. And the centerpiece of the whole thing, the thing my kids talked about every single February when the cold started getting old, and they were counting the days until warm weather, was the pool. It was an above-ground pool, 18 feet across, 4 feet deep, with a solid deck I had built around it from pressure-treated lumber and a little privacy screen on the west side, so the afternoon sun did not cook you alive while you were trying to float in peace. My wife Denise had picked out the liner, a deep blue with a subtle wave pattern that made the water look better than it had any right to look for an above-ground pool in a suburban backyard. My kids, Marcus, who was 12, and Lily, who was 9 that summer, had spent 3 summers in that pool. They had friends over. They had birthday parties. They had those long, unstructured summer afternoons that I still think are one of the genuinely good things about childhood. The kind where you get in the water at 2 in the afternoon and get out at 7 when someone's parent finally insists on dinner. Beverly Hutchins moved into the house on my left in April of 2019. She was retired, she told me during our first and only genuinely friendly conversation, from a career in human resources. She had moved from across town after her divorce. She was looking forward to a quiet neighborhood, she said. She was looking forward to peace. She said the word peace 3 times in that first conversation. I remembered it later, not fondly. The first month was fine. Beverly waved. Beverly made small talk at the mailbox. Beverly brought over a small plant as a housewarming gesture for herself, which she left on my porch with a note that said she was looking forward to being good neighbors. Denise thought she seemed pleasant. Marcus barely noticed her existence. Lily waved back when Beverly waved and then went back to whatever she was doing. May was fine, still fine. June was when the pool went up. I put the pool up every year in early June. It was a 2-day process. Day 1 was cleaning the liner storage, checking all the equipment, running the pump connections. Day 2 was actually filling it, which with an 18-foot pool took most of a day and involved a lot of standing around watching water level rise, with the specific anticipatory satisfaction of knowing that by tomorrow afternoon the kids would be in it. Beverly came outside while I was setting up on day 1. She watched from her side of the property line for a while without saying anything. Then she said, "What are you putting up?" I told her, "A pool, same as every year." She said, "A pool, in your backyard?" I said, "Yes, right here in my backyard, same place it goes every year." She said, "How big is it?" I told her, 18 feet. She said, "And you fill it with water?" I genuinely did not know how to respond to that question. I said yes, that was generally how pools worked. She looked at the liner I had spread out on the grass. She looked at the pump components laid out next to it. She looked at the deck frame leaning against the fence. She did not say anything else. She went back inside. I filed that exchange in the back of my mind. In a folder, I mentally labeled probably nothing, but maybe keep an eye on it. 3 days later, when the pool was filled and the deck was installed, and Marcus and Lily had already spent 2 afternoons in it, Beverly knocked on my front door. She was holding a printed document. She said she had looked into the HOA regulations regarding temporary structures and water features, and she wanted to make sure I was aware that above-ground pools might require a permit or HOA approval, depending on the specifics. She said she was not accusing me of any violation. She was just making sure I had the information. I took the document, I thanked her. I told her the pool had been in the same spot for 5 years and had been through HOA review twice during routine property inspections with no issues noted. I showed her the inspection records, which I went and got from my filing cabinet while she stood on the porch, because I had learned early in my time on Sycamore Bend that documentation was never a waste of time. She looked at the inspection records. She said, "HM." She gave me back the document she had brought. She left. That was the first week of June. By the third week of June, Beverly had filed a formal HOA complaint about the pool. The complaint alleged that the pool was a noise nuisance due to the sounds of children playing, that the pool pump was running at hours that disturbed her peace, that the water from the pool was causing runoff onto her property, and that the deck structure constituted a permanent addition that required separate approval from the HOA Architectural Review Committee. 4 complaints in one document, submitted by a woman who had lived on Sycamore Bend for approximately 60 days. I want to be fair here. Some of those complaints had more merit than others. The runoff complaint had essentially no merit because my yard slopes away from Beverly's property, a fact verifiable by standing in either backyard for 30 seconds. The Architectural Committee complaint had limited merit because the deck had been reviewed during a property inspection 2 years prior and no action had been required. The pump noise complaint was the most substantive because pool pumps do make noise. Mine ran on a timer from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., and I acknowledged when the HOA asked that the morning start time might be earlier than ideal for immediate neighbors. I adjusted the pump timer to 7 a.m. I sent Beverly a written notice of the adjustment via the HOA's communication system. She filed a second complaint 2 days later, claiming the 7 a.m. start was still too early and requesting it be moved to 9 a.m. The HOA declined to require a 9 a.m. start time. Their letter to Beverly noted that pool equipment operating at 7 a.m. was within the permitted hours for mechanical equipment and that no further adjustment was required. Beverly called me. She had somehow gotten my cell number, I assume from the HOA directory. She called me on a Wednesday evening while I was helping Marcus with a history project and Lily was watching something in the living room. She said she wanted to talk about the situation neighbor to neighbor rather than through official channels. I said I was happy to talk. I said I had made the adjustment she requested and the HOA had reviewed her additional request and declined it, and I was not sure what further conversation was needed. Beverly said the pool was ruining her summer. I said I was sorry she felt that way. She said the sound of children laughing and splashing was extremely disruptive to her. I waited for her to continue because I genuinely thought she might be leading somewhere with that sentence, somewhere that included an acknowledgement of how she understood it sounded. She did not continue. She stopped there, as if the sound of children laughing in a backyard pool on a summer afternoon was a self-evident problem requiring no further explanation. I said, Beverly, I understand pool sounds can be disruptive sometimes. We try to keep pool time to reasonable hours, and we're always done and out of the water by 8:30. She said 8:30 was too late. I said the HOA permitted outdoor activity until 9. She said she was not interested in what the HOA permitted. She was interested in being a good neighbor, and she hoped I felt the same way. I said I did feel that way. I said I had adjusted the pump timer. I said we kept pool hours within the HOA guidelines. I said I was not sure what additional accommodation I could offer. She said I could take the pool down. There was a pause on my end, a fairly long one. I said, Beverly, I am not taking the pool down. She said she was disappointed to hear that. I said good night. I went back to helping Marcus with his history project. Denise, who had been half listening from the kitchen doorway, came and sat down next to me after Marcus went to get a snack and said quietly, "Is she serious?" I said yes. Denise looked at me for a moment. She said, "What are we going to do?" I said I was going to keep the pool up and keep our kids in it all summer and be as reasonable as I reasonably could be and document everything. Denise said, "You and your documentation." I said documentation had never once let me down. She said, "Fair enough." July arrived, and Beverly Hutchins shifted into a higher gear. The HOA complaints kept coming. By the first week of July, she had submitted 2 more, one about alleged water splashing sounds past 8 p.m. on a specific Saturday, and one about what she described as excessive use of the pool area by non-resident minors, which was her formal way of saying that my kids had friends over. The HOA dismissed both within 72 hours. I got copies of both dismissal notices. I kept them. What changed in July was that Beverly started involving herself directly rather than going through official channels. She would come outside while the kids were in the pool and stand at the property line and watch. Not say anything, just stand there, with her arms crossed, watching children play in a pool, for minutes at a time. Marcus noticed it first. He is 12 years old and not easily rattled, but one afternoon he came inside while Denise was in the kitchen and said, "Mom, the lady next door is standing at the fence again watching us." Denise went outside. Beverly was standing exactly where Marcus had said, arms crossed, staring at the pool area. Denise said hello. Beverly said hello back. Neither of them said anything else for a moment. Then Beverly said, "The children are being quite loud today." Denise said, "They're having fun." Beverly said, "Yes, I can hear that." Denise came back inside and told me about it. I went out and spoke to Beverly directly. I asked her politely, but plainly, whether there was a specific concern she wanted to raise, because if so, I was happy to discuss it, but standing at the fence watching my children was something I found uncomfortable, and I would appreciate it if she refrained. Beverly said she was standing in her own yard. I said yes, and she was welcome to stand wherever she liked in her own yard, and I was asking her as a neighbor to consider that her presence at the fence line watching the children was creating a situation I found concerning. She said she found the noise concerning. I said I would continue to maintain our current pool hours, and I appreciated her understanding. She went back inside. Marcus came out later and asked me if everything was okay. I told him yes. I told him to go back in the pool. He did. I watched him do a cannonball off the deck that sent water 3 feet in every direction, and I heard him laugh the way 12-year-olds laugh when they are doing exactly what they are supposed to be doing with a summer afternoon. And I thought, whatever this is going to take, it is worth it. The 911 call happened on a Saturday in late July. I want to give you the full picture of that day because context matters here. It was a Saturday. It was 92 degrees. Denise had gone to visit her sister for the afternoon. I was in the backyard with Marcus, Lily, and 3 of their friends, 2 of Marcus's from school and 1 of Lily's from down the street. 6 people total in and around the pool, myself included, on a 92-degree Saturday afternoon. We had been outside for about 2 hours. The kids were doing what kids do in pools. They were loud. They were splashing. They were doing the thing where you try to flip someone off a pool float and then argue about the technique. It was exactly as loud as 6 people in and around a pool on a hot day are supposed to be. I was in a lawn chair about 8 feet from the pool, half reading a book, half watching the kids, the specific parental split attention that is its own particular form of summer contentment. I had a cold drink. The string lights were on because we had put them up for the afternoon shade. The fire pit was not lit because 92 degrees. At approximately 3:45 p.m., Beverly Hutchins appeared at my back gate. Not at the fence line this time. At the gate, she knocked on it. I walked over and opened it. She was holding her phone, and she had an expression on her face that I would describe as artificially calm. The kind of calm that is actually the surface of something much less calm underneath. She said, "I need you to tell these children to be quiet." I said, "Beverly, they're children in a pool on a hot Saturday afternoon." She said the noise was intolerable, and she had been trying to enjoy her backyard all afternoon, and it was impossible. I looked past her at her backyard. There was a single folding chair in the middle of it and a book on the armrest. I said, "What would you like me to do?" She said, "Tell them to stop splashing and yelling." I said, "I am not going to tell children not to splash in a pool." She said, if I did not do something she would. I said I was not sure what she meant by that. She held up her phone. She said, "I'll call the police." I looked at her phone. I looked at her face. I said, "Beverly, you can do whatever you feel you need to do." I went back to my lawn chair. She went back to her backyard. For about 4 minutes, nothing happened. The kids kept swimming. I went back to my book. I thought maybe that was the end of it, that she had made the threat as a tactic, and it had not produced the response she wanted, and she would regroup and come up with something else. Then I heard her, from the other side of the fence, talking on her phone, and I heard her say the words, "I need to report a disturbance." She called 911. Beverly Hutchins, on a 92-degree Saturday afternoon in a residential neighborhood with no traffic incident, no medical emergency, no fire, no crime, and no disturbance beyond the sound of children in a backyard pool, called 911. I sat in my lawn chair, and I did not move. I told the kids everything was fine when Marcus looked over at me with a question on his face. I texted Denise. I set my book down, and I started paying very close attention to everything around me. Patrol car arrived 17 minutes later. 2 officers. They came to my front door. I met them there. They said they had received a call about a noise disturbance. I said I was happy to speak with them. I invited them around to the back. I showed them the pool, the kids, the setup, the lawn chair, the cold drink, the string lights. I showed them the pool hours I had posted on the deck frame, which I had put up 2 weeks prior, when I had started anticipating exactly this kind of escalation. One of the officers, a woman named Officer Parrish, looked at the pool, looked at the kids, looked at the posted hours, and said, "What time did you set up today?" I said about 1:30. She said, "And it's now 4 p.m., and the children are what, playing?" I said yes. She said, "Okay." She looked at her partner. Her partner was looking at the posted hours with an expression that suggested he was doing some kind of internal calculation about his afternoon. They spoke to Beverly. I was not present for that conversation. I stayed in my backyard and watched the kids, who had gotten quieter when the patrol car arrived and were now looking at me with varying degrees of anxiety. I told them it was fine. I told them they could keep swimming if they wanted. Marcus got back in. Lily followed. The other kids hesitated and then followed Lily. Officer Parrish came back alone. She said, "Mr. Calloway, I want to be straightforward with you about what we found. The noise level here is within the residential activity guidelines. This is a normal backyard pool situation on a hot Saturday afternoon. We are not going to be citing you for anything." I thanked her. She said, "I do want to note, and this is not anything formal, that dispatching emergency services for a noise complaint of this nature creates a strain on resources that are needed elsewhere. I've communicated that to your neighbor." I said I appreciated that. She said, "Is this an ongoing situation between you and this neighbor?" I said yes. She said, "I'd recommend continuing to document it." I said I was already doing that. She nodded. She and her partner left. I went back to my lawn chair. The kids were back in the pool. The afternoon was still 92 degrees and still perfect. The string lights were still on. My cold drink was warm now, so I went and got a new one. When Denise got home at 6:30, I was at the grill making dinner, and the kids were toweling off on the deck. She came around back and took in the scene and said, "Your text said the police came." I said yes. She said, "And?" I said they left. She said, "And the kids?" I said they were fine, and they had spent the whole afternoon in the pool. She looked at the grill and the kids and the string lights and the pool reflecting the early evening light. She said, "Beverly called 911 over the sound of children swimming." I said yes. She sat down in the lawn chair that had been mine all afternoon. She said, "Okay, now I want to be involved in whatever you're planning." I handed her my cold drink. I said, "Good," because I could use the help. The thing about Beverly calling 911 was that she did not understand what she had done. She thought she had escalated. She thought she had brought in a level of official intervention that would force my hand. What she had actually done was hand me something I had not had before, a police log entry documenting her behavior, a time-stamped official record that she had used emergency services to report children playing in a pool. And in doing so, she had crossed a line that shifted the entire dynamic of what I was able to do in response. The next morning I called my neighbor 2 houses down, a man named Phil Drummond, who had become something of a friend over the years, and who had, in the past 2 months, watched the Beverly situation develop with the bemused concern of someone observing a slow-motion natural disaster from a safe distance. Phil worked in city administration and knew a fair amount about how residential complaints were handled at various levels. I told him about the 911 call. Phil was quiet for a moment, then he said, "She called 911 for pool sounds." I said yes. He said, "Ray, filing a false emergency report or using emergency services for non-emergency matters is not a minor thing in this city. There are ordinances about it. They're not often enforced, but they exist." I said I was aware. He said, "Have you talked to anyone at the city level yet?" I said not yet. He said, "You might want to." He gave me the name and contact information for the city's residential services coordinator, a position I had not previously known existed, whose job included handling patterns of complaint misuse and neighbor dispute escalation that had reached city service involvement. Phil said this coordinator had the authority to formally flag a resident's complaint history, which could affect how future complaints from that resident were prioritized and reviewed. I made an appointment for the following Tuesday. In the meantime, Beverly made 2 more moves. The first was that she posted in the Sycamore Bend neighborhood Facebook group about, and I am quoting here because someone sent me a screenshot, the ongoing noise situation on our block that some residents seem to feel they are entitled to subject the rest of us to. She did not name me. She did not have to. Everyone on Sycamore Bend knew about the pool. The responses were not what Beverly was hoping for. 14 people commented. 3 were sympathetic. 11 were not, ranging from politely noting that pool sounds in summer were normal to one neighbor named Cheryl 3 houses down who wrote, "Beverly, I can hear your television through my bedroom wall every night, and I have never filed a complaint. Maybe let's all extend each other some grace here." Beverly responded to Cheryl that was entirely different. Cheryl did not reply. She did not need to. The thread had already done its work. The second move Beverly made was to send me a hand-delivered letter, actual paper, slid through my mail slot, informing me that she was formally requesting that I remove the pool at the end of the current season and not reinstall it the following summer. She framed this as a mutual agreement for the good of the neighborhood. She said she was willing to put in writing that she would cease all HOA complaints if I agreed to this condition. I read the letter, I photographed it, I put it in my file. Then I wrote my response. My response documented, in order, the following: the 8 HOA complaints Beverly had filed, 7 of which had been dismissed, and 1 of which had resulted in a minor pump timer adjustment that I had voluntarily made. The 911 call with the police report case number I had obtained. The pattern of standing at the property line watching my children, which I had documented with timestamps in my own records. The Facebook post, of which I had a screenshot. And a statement that I had no intention of removing my pool, that the pool was a legal structure that had been present on my property for 5 years, had passed 2 HOA inspections, and would continue to be in use for as long as I wished to maintain it. I also included, at the end of the letter, something that Denise had suggested and that I thought was exactly right. A paragraph noting that the 911 call had been logged as a non-emergency misuse, that I had scheduled a meeting with the city residential services coordinator to discuss the pattern of complaint behavior, and that I was prepared to pursue whatever formal channels were available to me if the current pattern continued. I delivered it by hand. I put it through her mail slot. I went home. Denise was waiting in the kitchen. She said, "Did you do it?" I said yes. She said, "How do you feel?" I thought about it, I said, like I finally stopped playing defense. She smiled. She said, "Good, now let's go watch the kids swim." We went to the backyard. It was a Monday evening, still warm, the long blue hour before dark. Marcus was in the pool. Lily was on the deck painting her nails with the focused seriousness she brought to everything. The pool pump was running on its 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. schedule. The string lights were on. Beverly's backyard was empty and quiet. I sat down in my lawn chair, and Denise sat down next to me, and we watched our son float on his back in the pool, with his eyes closed and his arms out, the specific pose of someone who has decided for the moment that nothing in the world needs his attention. It was a good evening, one of the best of that summer. No Maury pool. Karen lost her mind and called 911 over my backyard. My meeting with the City Residential Services Coordinator happened on a Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. in a municipal building that smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air. The coordinator's name was Frank Okonkwo. He was a heavy-set man in his mid-50s with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a desk covered in organized stacks of paper that suggested a person who processed a very large volume of information every day and had developed efficient systems for doing so. Frank listened to the entire situation without interrupting. I had brought my folder. I walked him through it chronologically, the 8 HOA complaints and their outcomes, the pump timer adjustment, the fence line standing incidents, the Facebook post, the hand-delivered letter requesting pool removal, the 911 call. Frank took notes while I talked. When I got to the 911 call, he stopped me and said, "She called 911 for pool sounds." I said yes. He said, "On a Saturday." I said yes, 92 degrees, 6 people, normal Saturday pool activity. He put his pen down. He looked at his notes. He said, "Mr. Calloway, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it carefully before you answer. In your assessment, is this neighbor operating in good faith and simply having a harder time adjusting to the neighborhood than most people would, or is this a deliberate pattern of escalating harassment?" I thought about it for a moment. I said, "I think it started as the first thing and became the second thing." Frank nodded slowly. He said, "That's usually how it goes." He explained what his office could do. He could not compel Beverly to do anything. He was clear about that. His office did not have enforcement authority over private behavior. What his office could do was formally document the pattern, add a notation to Beverly's city resident complaint file indicating misuse of emergency services, and send a formal letter from his office to Beverly noting that her use of the 911 system for non-emergency matters had been reviewed, and that future similar calls could result in a citation under the city ordinance that addressed emergency service misuse. That letter, Frank told me, was not a fine. It was not a legal action, but it was an official communication from the city on city letterhead. And in his experience, official letters from city offices on city letterhead had a clarifying effect on people who had previously believed their actions were without consequence. He also said something that I found more useful than anything else in that meeting. He said that the Residential Services Office maintained a log of complaint patterns for residents throughout the city, and that Beverly's name would now be added to that log with the current documentation. He said that if Beverly filed any future complaints at the city level, they would be reviewed with awareness of the existing pattern, not ignored, but reviewed in full context. I thanked him, I shook his hand, I went home. 3 days later, Beverly received a letter from the City Residential Services Office. I know she received it because Phil Drummond told me. Phil had a way of knowing things on Sycamore Bend without appearing to seek them out, the specific skill of a person who is genuinely liked by everyone on the block, and therefore becomes a natural repository of neighborhood information. He told me that Beverly had come to his door that evening after receiving the letter, visibly agitated, wanting to know if he knew anything about a city office contacting residents about complaints. Phil said he was sorry he couldn't be more helpful. He told her he wasn't familiar with the specific situation. He said it very kindly and with complete facial neutrality, a skill he had apparently developed over many years of city administration work. He called me afterward and said, "The letter landed." I said, "How did she seem?" Phil said, "Like someone who just discovered the game, has a referee she didn't know about." August, the pool was still up. The kids were still in it. Marcus was working on a new cannonball variation he called the missile, which involved a running start and a specific tuck that he had been refining for 2 weeks. Lily had entered a phase where she preferred to float on an inflatable flamingo and be left in peace, which I respected. Beverly had gone quiet. 14 days after the city letter arrived, she had filed no new HOA complaints. She had not appeared at the fence line. She had not knocked on my gate. She had not posted in the neighborhood Facebook group. The hand-delivered letters had stopped. I did not mistake the quiet for resolution. I had enough experience by now to understand that with someone like Beverly, quiet was not the same as finished. Quiet was a different kind of planning. What I did not anticipate was the direction the next move came from. Not Beverly, Beverly's brother. His name was Gerald Hutchins. He drove a silver sedan and wore polo shirts and had the kind of easy confidence that some people develop from a lifetime of being the person in the family who solves problems. He knocked on my door on a Wednesday evening in mid-August. He introduced himself. He said Beverly had asked him to come talk to me. I invited him in. Denise came and sat down too. Gerald sat across from us at the kitchen table and said he wanted to have a frank conversation and he hoped we could keep it civil. I said that had always been my preference. Gerald said that Beverly was having a hard time. He said the divorce had been difficult and the move had been a bigger adjustment than she had anticipated, and she had perhaps handled some of the neighborhood situations in ways she now recognized were not ideal. He said she was embarrassed about the 911 call. He said she was embarrassed about the city letter. I listened to all of this. Then I said, "Gerald, I appreciate you coming and I appreciate what you've shared. I want to be equally straightforward with you. I have 2 children who have spent their summers in that pool for 5 years. Your sister tried to use official channels, neighborhood social media, hand-delivered ultimatums, and emergency services to force me to take down a legally installed structure that my kids love. I have not said a hostile word to Beverly in this entire situation. I have not posted anything on social media. I have documented everything and responded through proper channels. I am sympathetic to the fact that the divorce was hard and the move was an adjustment, but sympathy does not extend to removing my children's pool." Gerald looked at me for a moment. He said, "She's not going to ask you to remove it." I said that was good. He said, "She wants to know if there's any accommodation that would help reduce the tension." Denise spoke up. She said, "Has Beverly considered that the most effective accommodation would be simply letting neighbors live normally in their own backyards?" Gerald looked at Denise. He looked back at me. He said, "She's going to try. That's what I came to tell you. I think she understands she overstepped." I said I hoped that was true. I said if Beverly had concerns in the future, I would welcome a direct and civil conversation before any official complaints were filed. I said that had always been my preference, starting from the very first conversation we had ever had. Gerald nodded. He said he thought they could work with that. He left. Denise and I sat at the table for a moment after the door closed. She said, "Do you believe him?" I said I believed he was sincere. I said I was less certain about Beverly. She said, "What do you want to do?" I said what I had been saying all summer, keep the pool up, keep the documentation, see what came next. What came next was something I had not prepared for because I had been so focused on the official channels, the HOA, the city, the police report, the formal complaint systems, that I had somewhat underestimated the informal ones. The neighborhood knew. I do not mean they knew in the way of vague gossip. I mean they knew specifically and in detail because Beverly, in the course of her campaign, had told them. the Facebook post, the conversations at mailboxes, Phil's driveway encounter. Beverly had spent the summer constructing a version of events in which she was the reasonable party being subjected to unreasonable disruption, and she had shared that version widely. And what she had not anticipated was that the more she shared it, the more opportunities people had to notice that the version did not match what they were actually observing. Cheryl from 3 houses down came over one afternoon in late August. She brought a bottle of wine and asked if she could sit on the front porch for a while. We sat. She said she wanted me to know that she had been paying attention to the situation, and she thought Beverly had gone about it completely wrong. She said she could hear my pool on summer afternoons, and it had never once bothered her. She said she raised 2 kids herself, and she knew what a backyard summer was supposed to sound like. Then she said something that I think about sometimes when I tell this story. She said, "Ray, the thing about people like Beverly is that they think loudness equals strength. She made a lot of noise because she thought that was how you win. But you were quiet and careful, and you documented everything, and you went through the right channels. And from where I'm sitting, you won the whole thing without ever raising your voice." I said I was not sure it was over. She said, "No, but you're ahead." She poured me a glass of wine, and we sat on the porch in the August evening and talked about our kids and the neighborhood and things that had nothing to do with Beverly Hutchins or extension cords or pool permits or 911 calls. It was a good hour, the kind that reminds you what the point of living somewhere is. September came. I took the pool down the 3rd week of the month, the same week I do every year, not because of Beverly, but because September in our part of the country is the week you acknowledge that summer is actually over no matter how much you want it not to be. Marcus helped me drain it and fold the liner and disconnect the pump. Lily supervised from the deck with the specific authority of a 9-year-old who has decided she is done with physical labor. We wrapped the liner in the tarp it lives in from October through May. We stored the pump in the garage. We disassembled the deck and stacked the boards along the back fence. The backyard without the pool looked bigger and quieter and more like a yard in transition than a yard at rest. Beverly's backyard was also empty by then. Her single folding chair had gone inside. Her book was gone. Whatever she had been trying to protect about her summer quiet had either been protected or abandoned. I was not sure which. I stood at my back window one evening in late September looking at both yards. Mine and hers, side by side, separated by 6 feet of fence, and about 3 years of something I still did not have a clean word for. Not a feud, not exactly, more like a test of who I was going to be when someone decided the rules did not apply to them and that my family's comfort was a reasonable price for their own. I had not passed that test easily. There were evenings that summer when I had sat in the kitchen after the kids went to bed and felt the weight of it in a way I did not like. The fatigue of constant documentation, the low-level vigilance of never knowing what the next complaint was going to be about, the anger, mostly managed, but occasionally very not managed, of watching my son ask why the neighbor was staring at them again and not having an answer that made real sense. But I had passed it, and the pool had stayed up all summer. I want to tell you about the following June, because the story does not end in September. June of 2020. I put the pool up again. Same place, same deck, same liner with the wave pattern Denise had picked out. Same pump on the same timer, 7 am to 8 p.m. Marcus, who was 13 now and going through the phase where he was deeply convinced he was too mature for childish things, got in the pool on day 2 and stayed in until dinner, and did not appear to find this inconsistent with his new sophisticated worldview. Lily, who was 10, had developed a more complex relationship with the inflatable flamingo and had also acquired an inflatable unicorn, and was mediating some kind of territorial dispute between them that only she fully understood. Beverly came outside the first afternoon. The pool was up. I was on the deck adjusting the pump connection. I heard her back door. I looked up. She came to her side of the fence. She looked at the pool. She looked at the deck. She looked at me. I looked at her. We stayed like that for a moment. 2 neighbors and a fence, and a full year of history between us. Then Beverly Hutchins said, in a voice that was not warm but was not hostile, a voice that was doing its level best at something that did not come naturally to her. The kids must be happy to have it back. I said yes, they were happy to have it back. She said, I'll try to keep the television down in the evenings. I said I appreciated that. She went back inside. I stood on the deck for a moment after she closed her door. The pool was full and blue and reflecting the early June sky. The pump was running on schedule. The deck boards were solid under my feet. Was Beverly Hutchins a changed person? I genuinely did not know. Was she a neighbor who had learned something about the cost of the approach she had chosen? I thought maybe yes, at least partially. Would there be future friction? Probably. People like Beverly do not transform completely. They adjust. They recalibrate. They find a new equilibrium that involves less open conflict because the old approach proved more expensive than they had anticipated. But she had said a civil thing, voluntarily, with no official process requiring her to, and the kids were in the pool, and it was June, and the string lights were up, and Lily had apparently resolved the flamingo-unicorn territorial dispute in favor of a power-sharing arrangement that satisfied both parties. Some things end with a dramatic ruling or a definitive moment. Some things end with a quiet sentence across a fence line that is not quite an apology, but is as close to one as the person saying it is capable of getting. Beverly had said her close to an apology. The pool stayed up. My kids had their summer. That was enough for me. Here is what I want you to take from this, if you are in the middle of something like it right now. If you have a Beverly, if you have someone next door who has decided that their comfort is more important than your life and your kids and your backyard and your 11 years of roots in a place you chose. Be quieter than they expect. People who use noise and complaints and official channels as weapons assume that you will respond with the same energy. They count on the chaos. Be the one who documents instead of reacts. Be the one who goes through proper channels with a folder full of evidence instead of showing up at their door furious. Be the one who is still there, still standing, still with the pool in the same place when they run out of moves. It is slower, it is more tiring in some ways. There are evenings when you wish you could just respond in kind and be done with it. But the documentation is undefeatable. The paper trail is undefeatable. The record of who did what and when and what the official response was, that is something no amount of noise and bluster can override. Marcus is 16 now. He does not do cannonballs anymore. He swims laps. He is on the school team. His freestyle is fast enough that when he practices in the backyard pool, it looks like the pool is slightly too small for him, like he should be somewhere bigger, which I suppose is true in the way it is true about all 16-year-olds. Lily still has the flamingo. The unicorn did not survive a particularly ambitious summer afternoon 2 years ago and was retired with appropriate ceremony. Lily remains its primary operator, and it remains unsinkable. The pool goes up every June. It comes down every September. The pump runs from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. on its timer. Beverly Hutchins has not filed a single HOA complaint in 2 years. The summer sounds like it is supposed to sound.